How was your day? Maybe some of it was spent not quite fitting. Too much, too loud, or just different from what the room expected. There was a god born wrong, or so they said. His name was Set, son of Nut the Sky, in Egyptian mythology. If today had a little of that, he knows exactly where you've been. You don't have to make sense tonight, just rest. And listen. This story starts where all Egyptian stories start, in the dark, before the world had a shape. The bark is burning. Ra's solar boat, the vessel that carries the sun across the sky, is under attack, and only one god stands between it and destruction. Set, the one they called the enemy, the one they needed anyway. Apep, the serpent of absolute chaos, coils around the bark. If it wins, the sun never rises. Set drives his spear into its skull, every night. Without recognition, without thanks. The question this myth never quite answers: if Set is the villain, if he murdered his own brother, why does the sun keep rising? Why does Ra need him? Maybe today asked you to hold something together. Quietly, without credit. To stand at the edge of something difficult and not walk away. Set has been doing that since before the pyramids. The gods of Egypt have watched over sleeping mortals since before the first pharaoh drew breath. Tonight, settle in. If you drift off before the story ends, Set will keep watch. He always does. This is what we do here. Every week, one myth, one night. A story that survived thousands of years and still has something to say. Comfortable now, adjust your pillow. Find your warmth. If you drift off before the end, the ancient gods won't mind. They've watched over sleeping mortals since the first dynasty. This is only the beginning of Set's story. The part most people never reach, where chaos becomes necessary. That's still ahead. But not tonight. Tonight, just this. If tonight felt like something, subscribe. We'll be here next week. Another myth, another night like this. Now back to ours. Before Set, before any of them, there was nothing. The Egyptians called it Nun, the primordial ocean. Dark water in every direction. No sky, no earth, just potential. From that dark ocean rose Adam, the first god the self created. He spoke the world into being. He named things. The sky became Nut, the earth became Jeb. And from Nut and Jeb came four children of the sky and earth. Osiris, ordered, beloved, destined to rule. Isis, devoted, the greatest magician in creation. Nephthys, quiet, loyal, overlooked, and Set. Set was born tearing his way out. Impatient, they said. Violent before he could speak. The stories don't agree on much, but they agree on this: he arrived different, and he knew it. Osiris received Egypt, the Black Land, the fertile, ordered, beloved Nile Valley. Set received the Red Land, the desert, the storms, the foreign peoples at the margins of the world. The Egyptians had a word for the fertile land, Kemet, the Black Land. For the desert, Dishret, the Red Land. Osiris was Kemet. Set was Deshret, order. Chaos, brother against brother, since the beginning. The world was young then. The gods walked the earth. Not distant, not symbolic, present. Osiris ruled from Memphis. His people loved him. The Nile flooded on schedule. Osiris taught them to farm, to build, to bury their dead with care. He gave Egypt its shape, the rhythm of flood and harvest, order made visible. Isis was beside him always. Not behind him, beside him. She was the greater magician. Some myths say she was the greater ruler too. She let Osiris take the credit. That's how much she loved him. Nephthys was Set's wife. Quiet, loyal, overlooked. The myths give her almost nothing to do in the good years. Only grief later, when grief is all there is. You've probably known someone like that. And then there was Set. He had his domain. The desert, the storms, the margins. He ruled there. He was good at it. No one asked how he was doing. He attended the councils. He sat with the Ennead, the 9 great gods, and voted and argued and was heard. But when the feasts were done, the others stayed near Osiris. Set walked home alone. The Egyptians understood this. They didn't pretend Set was happy. They built temples for him. They named pharaohs after him. Seti, Set knocked. The desert god had to be honored. whether you liked him or not. What did Set want? The myths are careful not to say too clearly. Power, perhaps. Recognition. To matter to the gods the way he already mattered to the desert. Maybe just to be seen as something other than wrong. He fought well. That much everyone agreed. When the gods needed a warrior, when something truly dangerous arrived, they called Set, and Set went every time. Osiris hosted it. Grand, generous, all the gods invited. Set came. He brought a gift, a beautiful chest, perfectly sized, inlaid with cedar and gold. He said whoever fit inside it could keep it. The chest fit Osiris perfectly. Set had built it that way. He had measured his brother while he slept. That's how long this had been planned. The lid sealed. 72 conspirators, Set's allies, rushed forward. They poured molten lead into the seams. Then they carried the chest to the Nile and threw it in. The Nile carried it north, into the Mediterranean, to the shores of Byblos, in what is now Lebanon. The chest came to rest among the roots of a great tree. The tree grew around it. A king built his palace around the tree. Osiris was inside, not dead, not yet. The Egyptian gods did not die easily. He was trapped between worlds, breathing slowly in the dark, waiting. Isis found out. The myths don't say how, only that she knew. She cut off a lock of her hair. She put on mourning clothes, and she began to search. She searched for months. She asked everyone, fishermen, children, the gods of the crossroads. Children knew. They had seen the chest pass. Children always know more than anyone asks. She came to Byblos. She sat by the palace well and waited. The queen's handmaidens came for water. Isis braided their hair and breathed warmth into their skin. They brought her to the queen. The queen made her a nursemaid for the royal infant. Isis tended the child gently. At night she placed him in fire, to burn away his mortality, to make him immortal, to give him the gift she could not give Osiris. The queen discovered what she was doing. She screamed. And in the disturbance, Isis revealed herself, wings spreading wide, the light of a goddess filling the room, and asked for the pillar. The king gave her the pillar. She cut it open herself, and she held her husband in her arms in the throne room of a foreign palace, in a city that didn't know his name. That's the part that stays with you. She brought him home on a bark, sailing the Nile south, his body wrapped and tended. She was going to bring him back. She knew how. She was, after all, the greatest magician in creation. Set found out. He had spies in the marshes. Everyone did. He found the bark. He found the body. And this time, he was not patient. He cut Osiris into 14 pieces. He scattered them across Egypt. 14 pieces. Across Egypt, in the marshes, in the desert, in the fields, at the river's edge. Scattered so completely that no one could put him back together. That was the plan. Isis searched again. This time with Nephthys, Set's own wife, who had chosen her sister over her husband. They searched the whole length of Egypt. They found 13 pieces. 13 of 14. The 14th piece, the last one, had been taken by the Nile. A fish had swallowed it. It was gone. Isis fashioned a replacement from gold. And then she began the work of making Osiris whole. She spoke the words of resurrection. She breathed life into him. She used every skill she had. Magic older than the gods, older than the world. Osiris opened his eyes. But he could not stay in the living world. The dead could not rule the living, even a god. He had crossed too far. He went to the underworld, Doat, and became its king, the judge of souls. He was dead and he was a king. The Egyptians understood this perfectly. Death was not the end. It was a different kind of ruling. Osiris became the most beloved god in Egypt after he died. Before Osiris went, Isis had one more hour with him, and from that hour, a child was conceived. A boy she would name Horus, the heir, the one who would challenge Set. Set took the throne of Egypt. He was not a tyrant, not at first. He was the strongest of the remaining gods. He had been waiting for this his whole long divine life. He sat down in Osiris's chair and looked out over the Nile. Egypt continued. The Nile flooded. The wheat grew. The people buried their dead and honored Osiris in the underworld and prayed to Ra in the sky. And at night, Set stood at the prow of Ra's bark and killed Apep. Every night, still, the Ennead, the council of 9 gods, watched. They were not comfortable with Set on the throne, but he was strong. He had won, and the law of the gods was not always the same as justice. Among them was Thoth, the god of wisdom, of writing, of the moon. He kept records. He watched Set carefully. He would matter later, remember that, for later. And there was Ra himself, the sun god, the father of creation, the one who traveled the sky each day and the underworld each night. Ra did not oppose Set openly. He had his reasons. He needed Set, and he knew it. Because every night, when the bark descended into the dot, Apep was waiting. The serpent of absolute chaos. Not Set's kind of chaos, not the useful kind, but oblivion, nothingness, the end of everything. Apep could not be killed. Every night it came back. Every night Set drove it off. This is the difference the Egyptians understood. Set's chaos kept the worst chaos at bay. You need the storm to hold off the void. Ra understood this the way you understand something you wish you didn't know. Set was necessary. Not in spite of what he was. Because of it. The very qualities that made him dangerous were the ones that kept the sun rising. Meanwhile, in the marshes of Chemis, Isis was hiding. She had gone into the deepest papyrus thicket she could find. She was waiting for her son to be born. Horus was born in the marshes, small, vulnerable, divine. Isis hid him among the reeds the way a human mother hides what she loves most when the world is dangerous. He was born into hiding. That was his beginning. She could not be with him always. She had to move, to work, to gather allies, to plan. She left him in the marsh with the goddesses who watched over children. Serket, Wadjet, Nakbet. Ancient protectors. One day Isis came back and found Horus still, not breathing. A scorpion had stung him, a desert creature. Some said sent by Set, others said simply chance. It doesn't matter. The effect was the same. She cried out. Her grief stopped the bark of Ra in the sky. The sun halted, and the gods came, Thoth among them, carrying the words of healing. The greatest magic, a mother's grief, loud enough to stop the sun. The Egyptians who first told this story did not believe Set was simply evil. That was a later reading. Greek, Roman, Christian. The original understanding was more complicated and more honest. Their world was built on a concept called Ma'at, order, truth, balance, cosmic rightness. But Ma'at required its opposite to exist. Without chaos, order has no meaning. Without Set, there is no Osiris. They built temples to Set, especially in Upper Egypt, in Nut, in Ombos. Pharaohs of the 19th dynasty bore his name proudly. Rameses the Great kept Set's priests. To honor the necessary is not the same as approving of the terrible. Picture a storyteller 3,000 years ago, sitting with this same story in the lamplight. They told it not to make children fear Set, but to explain why the world contains things that frighten us and still holds together. We've inherited Set's story through 3,000 years of retelling. Each teller changed something. The chaos god became the villain. Simpler that way. But the older version is still there, if you look. The one where he holds the spear. The one where the sun rises because he does his work. Thoth healed Horus. The words he spoke were old, older than the gods, pulled from the language of creation itself. The infant's breath returned. The sun moved again. Isis wept with relief. Horus grew in the marshes. Isis taught him everything. Magic, strategy, patience. She told him about his father. She told him who had taken the throne. She was careful how she said it. She did not tell him to hate Set. She told him to be ready. There is a difference. Hate makes you careless. Readiness keeps you alive. Set on the throne heard rumors. A child in the marshes, a son of Osiris. He sent scouts. They found nothing. The marsh hid what it held. But Set knew. He could feel it the way the desert feels the coming of rain. He increased his hold on the borders. He made the desert wider in spirit, if not in fact. He ruled competently, efficiently, and waited for the thing he knew was coming. Years passed. The Nile flooded and receded. Children became adults. The gods do not age, but they change. Set changed. Ruling is different from fighting. It asks different things. Horus, in the marsh, grew tall. He developed the falcon's eye, the capacity to see what others cannot, across great distances into the detail of things. He could watch the whole country from the sky. He went to the Ennead. He stood before the council and made his claim. The throne of Egypt belonged to the son of Osiris. He said it clearly and without flinching. He was young. He was not afraid. Set was summoned. He entered the hall and looked at his nephew. Horus, young, fierce, everything Osiris had been and something more, looked back. The room became very still. Set made his counterclaim. He had ruled Egypt. He had protected Ra's bark. He had held the borders. He was the strongest. Why should strength yield to lineage? The Ennead could not decide. Ra unusually favored Set, strength over bloodline. The other gods leaned toward Horus. They debated for 80 years, the longest argument in Egyptian mythology. While the gods argued, Set and Horus fought, not metaphorically, physically, magically, politically. They contested each other on every level the Egyptian universe provided. Horus lost his eye in one battle. Set's eye in another. They healed. They came back. They fought again. This is what the Egyptians meant when they said, the contendings. 80 years of everything, and neither would yield. Isis helped Horus where she could. She also, in one famous telling, helped Set briefly by accident. She was moved by his words when he didn't know who she was. Even she, who had the most reason to hate him, was moved. The Ennead grew tired of the argument. So did Ra. So did the gods at the margins who had watched 80 years of contested rule. Someone wrote a letter to Osiris in the underworld to ask his opinion. Osiris's reply arrived. It was brief. He said, the throne belongs to my son, and if the gods disagreed, he had an army of the dead who would be happy to come up and discuss it. The Ennead made its decision. Horus would rule the living. Set, the council decided, would remain the protector of Ra's bark. He would keep his domain, the desert, the storms, the margins. He would be needed, but not Pharaoh. Set heard the verdict. The myths are quiet about what his face did, only that he stood up, left the council hall, and walked back to the desert. His desert, the one place that had always been his. He went to Ra's bark that night. He took his position at the prow. A pep came, as it always did, and Set drove it back, as he always would. Whatever had happened in the council hall, this was the work. This was still his. Maybe you know that feeling. The work that continues after the recognition stops. The thing you keep doing. Not because anyone is watching, but because it needs to be done and you're the one who can. Horus ruled well. Egypt flourished under the Falcon King. The Nile gave its floods on schedule. The fields were full. The dead were judged fairly by Osiris below. Order restored. And at the edge of Egypt, at the margin where the black land meets the red, Set kept his domain. The storms were his. The desert was his. The foreigners at the border, he kept them back. He kept them back every night. The Egyptians told this story for 3,000 years. Through the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom. Through conquest and rebuilding, the story changed. Set grew darker in some tellings, more sympathetic in others. But one thing didn't change across the millennia. In every version, Set stood at the prow of Ra's bark. In every version, Apep came. In every version, Set drove it back. That part, the part that happened in the dark, was always true. There is a painting in the tomb of Ramesses VI. It shows Ra's bark in the underworld. And at the prow, clear and deliberate, the Set animal stands with his spear. They put it there so Ramesses would know who to thank. Let that settle. A god cast as villain, who murders, who loses, who is exiled from the throne, and they still painted him in the pharaoh's tomb, because they knew the sun needs the storm god always. Nephthys came back to Set in some versions. In others she didn't. The myths are honest about this too. Some things that break don't fully heal. She had chosen her sister. He had become something she couldn't follow. Some late Egyptian texts, from the Ptolemaic period, when Greek influences were strong, tried to make Set purely evil. The foreign pharaohs were more comfortable with simple stories. Good god, bad god, choose a side. But the older priests remembered. The ones who still said the ancient words at dawn, who thanked Set by name in their morning prayers, who knew that Ra's safe passage through the night depended on the god no one wanted to honor. They kept saying it. Set kept his vigil. Through 3,000 years of being called the villain, through empire and conquest and the slow ending of the world he was born into, he stood at the prow. He raised his spear, and the sun rose. Go back, before the verdict, before the 80 years, back to the night of the banquet. The night Set brought the chest. There are things that happen in that story worth sitting with more slowly. 72 conspirators. Set did not act alone. He had built alliances, gods and beings who for their own reasons wanted Osiris gone. The desert god was not friendless. He was just differently friended. He had measured Osiris while he slept, that detail. The mythology gives it to us plainly and then moves on. But think about what it means. The patience of that, the coldness of it, the grief of it. He had loved Osiris once. The myths don't say it plainly, but they carry the shape of it. Brothers who had grown up in the same sky, who had stood at the same councils. The contempt that becomes murder usually starts somewhere closer. The night of the banquet, the chest arrived. Set described it. Beautiful, he said, a gift for whoever fits inside. The gods were curious. Several tried. Then Osiris stepped forward. He stepped inside. He lay down. It fit him perfectly. Every line of the cedar exactly matched to his body. For one moment, he may have understood. Then the lid came down. Isis was not there that night. Some versions say she felt it. A cold at the edge of her awareness. The way you sometimes feel something has gone wrong before you know what. She turned toward Memphis and began to run. She arrived to find the hall empty. The feast cleared. Set gone, Osiris gone. The servants looked at the floor when she asked. She knew. She cut her hair and put on mourning clothes and began. The chest drifted north. The Nile was indifferent, carrying what it was given, as rivers do. The Mediterranean took it further, to Byblos, to the roots of the great tree, to the king's pillar. Isis followed the trail of knowing. She asked the gods of the crossroads. She asked children, always the children. She traveled north, into foreign country, into a world that did not speak her language. The palace well, the handmaidens, the braiding of hair. She breathed warmth into them, not magic exactly, just the warmth of someone who has been fully present with another person. They felt it. They brought her inside. The queen gave her the child to nurse. Isis held the infant, another woman's child, and felt the weight of what she had not yet had. The child in the marsh was not yet born. She tended this child with everything she had. She put him in fire at night, not to harm, to transform, to burn the mortality out of him. The flame was warm, not consuming. The child slept through it. That's how complete her protection was. The queen screamed when she saw. She snatched the child from the flames. In doing so, she interrupted the transformation, left her son mortal after all. The cost of fear, you've been there. Isis revealed herself. The wings spread, the light of a goddess filled the room. She was patient about it, not angry. The queen had done what any mother would do. Isis understood that more than anyone. She asked for the pillar. The king gave it. The tree was cut, the cedar opened, and there, still pale real, was Osiris. Isis pressed her face against his chest. She held that for a long time. She brought him home on the bark. The Nile again, south this time, toward Egypt, toward the marshes where she would begin the work. She stayed awake the whole journey. She didn't let go. She hid the bark in the marsh at Buto. She went to find her sister, to find the priest she trusted. She left the body for one night. One night, Set's spies were faster. Set came himself, not his scouts, himself. He stood over his brother in the marsh and made the decision that could not be undone. 14 pieces. He was not careless, he was precise. Isis returned to find the marsh empty. The silence of it. The way the reeds moved the same way they always moved. The Nile carried its dark current. She knew before she looked. She searched again. 14 pieces across the whole length of Egypt. She and Nephthys walked the same ground. The marshes, the desert edges. The river banks, walking in grief as a method. Moving when you cannot stop. 13. The fish had the 14th. The Nile gave nothing back. Isis fashioned the missing piece from gold, imperfect, substitute. The best she could do. This is what grief teaches. Sometimes you make do with what remains. She spoke the words. The oldest words. The ones that existed before language, before the gods, before the first light touched the primordial ocean. She had learned them from Thoth, who had learned them from the silence itself. His chest rose. Just once, then again and steadily. Osiris breathed, his eyes opened. He looked at Isis, and the look was the look of someone who has been a very long way away, and has come back. He told her he could not stay in the world of the living. The dead could not rule here, not even a god this powerful. But he was not gone. He would be in the dot. He would wait for her. He would judge souls fairly. He would be a good king of the dead. He went. The Doat's gate opened, golden in the darkness, warm and enormous, and Osiris walked through. Isis watched until the gate closed. Then she turned back to the world. There was still work to do. The work was Horus. She returned to the marshes of Chemis and gave birth to her son alone in the reeds. No court, no attendants. Just the papyrus and the water and the stars and the child who came into the world already carrying a destiny. She named him Horus, the distant one, the horizon. The name was a promise and a warning both. He would stand at the horizon between what was and what had to be. He would be the line Set could not cross. She hid him. The marshes were good for hiding. The papyrus was tall and dense. The birds were loud enough to cover sound. She settled him among the protector goddesses and went to do what needed doing. Set, on the throne, felt something shift. The desert told him. The way the desert tells its god things no one else knows. Something had been born that would challenge him. He didn't know when. He didn't know where. He began to wait more carefully. He ruled well in his way. He was not cruel to the people of Egypt. He kept the borders. He defeated the enemies at the margins. He sat in Osiris's chair and did the job that needed doing. But the chair never felt like it fit. Horus grew. In the marsh away from everything, Isis taught him. The falcon eye developed. That capacity for distance, seeing for the long view, for patience. He learned strategy before he learned anger. Thoth visited the marshes. He brought the boy books, scrolls of knowledge, the mathematics of the stars, the names of all the gods and what they governed. He visited because he kept records, and because he liked the boy. Here's the part the myths never make obvious. Isis didn't teach Horus to hate Set. She taught him to be ready. Hatred makes you predictable. A god who knows your hatred owns you. She gave her son something more useful. He was ready at 20. But divine years, which are not human years. He came out of the marsh the way storms come. Present first as a change in pressure, then as something you cannot ignore. He went to the Ennead and made his claim. The gods of Egypt, 9 of them, seated in the great hall of Heliopolis. Horus walked in without an escort. He stood in the center of the room and said, "This throne belongs to the son of Osiris." Set was summoned. He entered the hall and the 9 gods watched the 2 of them find each other across the room. Uncle and nephew. Neither looked away. Set was larger, Horus was still. Set made his case. He had ruled. He had protected Ra's bark every night for the years of his reign. He had held Egypt together. Strength is its own argument. He was not wrong. Horus listened. Then he spoke. Not loudly. The myths note he was not loud. He said, "I am the son of Osiris. The throne passes by line. My father built Egypt. I will continue what he built." The gods heard both. They could not decide. They argued for 80 years. Not constantly. There were other things to attend to. But the case of Horus versus Set hung over the divine court, like the question nobody could answer. Because both arguments had weight. While the gods argued, Set and Horus fought. They fought in the desert, physically, violently, the landscape cracking under their divine force. Neither could destroy the other. They were too matched. They fought on the river, boat races, sometimes, hippopotamus contests, who could hold the form longer. They contested each other in riddles before the Ennead. Every contest that Egyptian myth provided, they used. Set wounded Horus's eye in one battle. The left eye, the moon eye, the one that sees in darkness. Horus lost it, his vision halved. He fought on. Thoth restored it later, but Set's mark was real. Horus wounded Set in return. Took something in a later battle, something personal, something Set did not expect to lose. These are the parts the myths describe carefully, and then don't describe again. The wounds that change a person. Isis intervened sometimes. She harpooned, struck Set when he was in hippopotamus form and had Horus pinned. She had to release him. Her own magic turned against her when her compassion moved her. Even in warfare, she was complicated. This moment matters. Remember that, for later. The goddess with the most reason to destroy Set chose instead to wound and release. The Egyptians noted this. It meant something. They always meant everything. Thoth restored Horus's eye. He spoke the healing words, the same category of ancient language Isis had used for Osiris. The eye became the Wedjat. The whole eye, the protected eye, the eye that sees clearly after being broken. The eye of Horus became the most powerful protective symbol in Egyptian history, carved on coffin lids, worn by the living and the dead. The thing that was broken restored became the shield. That's the part that stays with you. 80 years. The argument in the council, the fights in the desert, the letters sent to Osiris, the Ennead growing tired, Ra growing tired, even the gods, it seemed, could be worn down by an argument that had no clean answer. The Egyptians didn't just tell this story. They built it into the structure of their world. Every pharaoh was both Horus and the son of Ra. The pharaoh performed rituals that reenacted the contest. They understood this wasn't history. It was ongoing. The double crown of Egypt. The white crown of Upper Egypt, combined with the red crown of Lower Egypt, represented the unity of Horus and Set. Order and chaos, north and south, both crowns together. You cannot rule with only one. The ancient Egyptians understood something that took the Western world much longer to articulate, that a system needs its disruptive element. That order without chaos becomes rigid. That the storm feeds the river that feeds the field. This is why the story survived 3,000 years. Not because it was entertaining, though it was, but because it described something true about power and family and what a society needs to function. Set is every necessary thing that isn't welcome. If today had a little of Set in it, if you were the one who held something difficult in place, without thanks, while everyone else moved toward the light, you know what this story is about. You've always known. The letter to Osiris. Someone, the myth doesn't say who, finally suggested it. Ask the dead king, the one who was there, the one who has been watching from the dot. He should have a vote. Osiris's reply was not long. He said the throne belonged to Horus. He said the wheat and barley I gave Egypt were for humans, not for gods who fight over what was never theirs. And then the implied threat, his armies of the dead. The Ennead decided. Thoth wrote the verdict. Horus would receive the throne. Set would retain the Red Land. He would keep the storms. And he would keep his place at the prow of Ra's bark. He was not stripped of everything. Set heard it. The myths give him one line here in some versions. He says, "I accept." In others he says nothing. In both versions he stands up. He leaves the hall. He walks out into the desert that was always his. Horus was crowned. The double crown placed on his head, white within red, Upper and Lower Egypt joined. The Ennead witnessed. Isis was there. She had waited 80 years for this crown. She watched her son receive it without reaching for it herself. Set went back to the desert. His desert. He stood at the margin of things and looked at Egypt. The black land, the green flood plain, the white city from his red land, and he felt the old dual pull home, not home. And that night he went to Ra's bark. Without being asked, without ceremony, he took his position at the prow, the place that was his, the work that was his, and waited for Apep. It always came. The great serpent rising from the underworld river, scales like dark water, mouth wide enough to swallow the sun. The same attack it had made every night for eternity. Set drove his spear in. Apep screamed. A sound the Egyptians said could be heard at the edge of the cosmos. The serpent writhed. The bark steadied. He always held. Ra watched from behind him. The sun god, ancient, enormous, watching the storm god do what the storm god does. He would never fully thank Set. That's not the relationship they had. But he watched. He saw. That mattered. The bark rose through the dot and into the sky. The sun emerged. Egypt woke up and thanked Ra for the morning. And at the prow, already planning for tonight, was Set. Horus took the throne of Egypt and held it through the first human pharaohs. Each pharaoh was the living Horus, the falcon king, the horizon god. They took the title son of Ra and the living Horus, both, at the same time. And Set remained at the margins. The desert was his. The storms, the foreigners at the border, he kept them back. Generation after generation of pharaohs ruled the black land. Set kept the red land safe. He kept the edge held. The Egyptians called the two lands, the black land and the red land. Together Egypt. You needed both. The fertility needed the border. The order needed the storm god watching the edges. One without the other was incomplete. Isis continued as she always had, advisor to Horus, keeper of knowledge, the greatest magician alive. She mourned Osiris in the appropriate seasons. She watched her son rule. She did not disappear into the background. She and Set were never reconciled, not in any version the Egyptians preserved. But there is one late text that shows them seated on the same side in a council. Not allies, not enemies. Something more complicated, something honest. Nephthys stayed with Isis. After everything. The sister who had chosen her sister over her husband. She remained. At Isis's side. At Osiris's throne in the dot. At the margins where she had always been most at home. In the deep night, when Egypt slept, Set stood at his post. Not thinking about thrones. Not thinking about his brother. Just watching the dark water. Waiting for the serpent. Holding the line between everything that exists and the nothing that wants to swallow it. This is what the myth preserves, through all its versions. Through 3,000 years of telling, the image of Set at the prow. That image survived everything, the demonization, the foreign conquests, the Christian conversion of Egypt. It's still there in the tombs. They put it in the pharaoh's tomb, because they wanted the pharaoh to know it in the afterlife. When the king descended into the dot, when he stood before Osiris for judgment, he would see who had held the bark safe on the journey down. He would know who to thank. Set is still there, in the deep chambers of the Valley of the Kings, in the painted tombs, in the hieroglyphs that tourists walk past and photograph and carry home on their phones without knowing what they're looking at. Tonight, wherever you are, the work continues. The bark moves through the dark. Set stands at the prow. Apep waits in the water below, and the sun is preparing, slowly, certainly, to rise. Let the story slow here. You don't need to track every piece. Just rest with this: a god who was cast out still showed up, every night, for the work that needed doing, because someone had to. The sun rises because someone does unglamorous work in the dark. That's the message in the stone. That's what they painted in the pharaoh's tomb. That's what 3,000 years of Egyptians agreed was worth preserving. Breathe. The story has come a long way tonight. So have you. Let everything settle. The Nile is dark and still. The papyrus reeds are quiet. The stars over Egypt are the same stars they always were. Osiris rules the dead with fairness. Isis watches over the living. Horus holds the throne of Egypt. And Set stands at the edge of everything, keeping the worst chaos at bay, one night at a time. There are stories older than writing that say the world was always going to need its Set. That chaos was always going to be part of the design. That the storm god was never the problem. He was the solution to a problem too large to explain. The story doesn't end. Egyptian myths don't end. They cycle. Like the Nile, like the sun, like the flood and the harvest. Osiris will rise again in every grain of wheat. Horus will rule in every pharaoh. Set will stand at every prow. And you tonight are part of the cycle. You rest. The world turns. Someone watches the edge of things. The work continues so that the morning comes. It has always been this way. Let the myth carry you now. The part of you that's still tracking, still making sure everything is right, you can let that rest. Set has the prow tonight. He's had it every night since before your great-grandmother's great-grandmother was born. The desert cools at night. It holds the day's warmth in its stone, but the air turns clean and cool and enormous. Set knows this. The desert is his. He has slept under this same sky 10,000 years. Sleep now if you're ready. The story will be here when you need it. The myths don't go anywhere. They wait in the stone and the papyrus and the painted tombs. Patient as gods, old as the Nile. The Nile is moving, it always moves. South to north. From the mountains of Africa to the Mediterranean. The way it has moved since before the first pharaoh. The river carries what it carries and keeps moving. Set is at the prow, he raises his spear. Apep coils in the water below. And Set, the villain, the exile, the god of the wrong kind of everything, drives the spear home. Again, as always, dawn comes slowly in the desert. It begins as a change in the color of the sky, from deep lapis to a warmer blue, then to the first hint of gold at the horizon. Set watches it come. He always watches it come. The Barky rises. Ra emerges, golden and enormous. Egypt wakes to another day. The flood and the harvest, the prayers and the markets, the living and the honored dead. Another day that Set made possible. Another day no one will thank him for. There was one night. The texts differ on when Apep came differently. Not the regular attack. Something changed in the serpent's approach. Larger, more complete. The darkness pressing closer than it ever had. Apep rose from the water complete. Not the coils, the whole serpent, head to tail. The full length of its ancient body breaking the surface of the underworld river. Ra's bark rocked. The light flickered. Set roared. Not a word, a sound. The sound of the desert in a sandstorm. The sound of thunder over the red land. He drove his spear into Apep's skull. He held it there. He pushed. He did not stop. The serpent screamed. Apep recoiled. Just enough. The spear driven through something vital. The darkness pulled back. The bark steadied. Set stood over the retreating serpent and watched it go. He was bleeding. He didn't move. Ra spoke. In the oldest texts, this is one of the few times Ra says Set's name directly. He says, You held when I could not. The sun will rise because of what you did tonight. Set heard it. He turned back to face the dawn. That was enough. Dawn broke over Egypt. The sun rose. Warm and enormous and certain. The Nile caught it first, then the fields, then the white walls of Memphis. Another day had come. Nobody below knew how close it had been. Set descended from the bark at dawn. The desert received him. The red land, warm already from a sun it had helped raise. He walked into the dunes and lay down. He slept. Even the storm god sleeps after a night like that. In Heliopolis, Ra rested on his bark as it crossed the sky. The other gods of the Ennead went about their days. Thoth wrote, Isis tended, Horus ruled. The world continued its rhythm. But something had shifted. Ra had spoken Set's name. That was not a small thing. In Egyptian theology, the name was the being. To name something was to see it. Ra had seen Set, not as a piece on a board, but as the one who held. In the dot, Osiris heard about it. News traveled between the worlds. Thoth made sure of it. Osiris sat with the scales of Maat and considered. His murderer. The one who saved the sun. He sent no message. Some reconciliations are not possible. Some things that are broken stay broken, and the world works anyway, around the break. Osiris understood this the way only the dead can. He returned to his judgments. Horus was in Memphis when the news came. Not the news about Set and Ra, something else. A messenger from the eastern border, riding hard. Foreign armies at the edge of the Red Land. A new pressure at Egypt's margin. The Hyksos. Foreign people from the east, the Levant, the lands beyond Sinai. They had been gathering for years, patient and organized, waiting for a moment when Egypt's attention was elsewhere. This was their moment. They came with horses. Egypt had no horses yet. The Nile was a world of chariots yet to be invented, of infantry and boats. The Hyksos arrived with a technology Egypt had never seen. That changes everything. Horus sent for Set, not a request, a summons. The Falcon King and the Desert God, on opposite sides of everything. And now Egypt needed both of them at the same time. The same problem demanding the same impossible alliance. Set came. He arrived at the eastern border before the message reached Memphis that he was coming. He moved the way desert storms move. Faster than expected, already there when you thought you had time. Here's the part that matters. Set looked at the Hyksos. Their horses, their weapons, their organized advance, and he did not despise them. He had always governed the foreigners. He understood the people at the margin better than any god in Egypt. He sent a messenger back to Horus. The message said, "They will not attack today. They are reading us. They want to know if we will break before they commit. Hold the line and do nothing. Let them wait." Horus sent back one word: agreed. Maybe you know that feeling. Receiving counsel from someone you distrust and recognizing it as the right counsel anyway, and having to decide what to do with both of those things at once. 3 days. The Hyksos held position. The Egyptian border soldiers held, nervous, watching the horses, not breaking. On the 3rd day, the Hyksos sent a scout forward. Set let him come. The scout reached the Egyptian line. Set stepped forward. Just him, no escort. He spoke to the scout in the scout's own language. The desert god governed the foreigners. He had always spoken their tongues. Nobody recorded what he said. Only the outcome the scout rode back. The Hyksos force held position for another 2 days, then withdrew. Not defeated. Not allied, simply not ready, not yet. Set watched them go. The Egyptian soldiers behind him exhaled. The collective breath of people who have been holding it for 3 days. He turned and walked back into the desert without waiting for thanks. He never waited for thanks. Horus received the report in Memphis. The eastern border held. No blood. No battle. Just the desert god standing between Egypt and what was coming. The Falcon King read the report twice. Then he set it aside and returned to his work. The Hyksos would come back. History records this. They did return decades later, and they did breach the border. But not this time. Not this border. Set held it this time. This is the pattern. Osiris built something. Horus maintained it. Set protected the edges that made it possible to maintain it all. 3 gods, 3 functions. None of them sufficient alone. The Ennead received reports. Thoth wrote everything down. The vote that had taken 80 years to reach. The verdict that gave Horus the throne and set the margin. Had produced, in fact, the system that worked. Terrible how that happens. Set returned to his desert. He walked the Red Land. The dunes, the dry riverbeds, the places where the stone shows through like bone. This was his. Not the credit. But the land and the work. Night fell over Egypt. The sun descended, Ra's bark dipping toward the western horizon, then into the mountain of the west. Then into the dot and the dark river beneath the world. Set was waiting at the dock. Ra's bark entered the dot. Set boarded. He took his place at the prow. The dark river stretched ahead, somewhere below the black water. Apep was already waking, as it woke every night, as it would wake every night until the end of all things. The attack came, as it always came, Apep rising from the black water, the scales catching torchlight, the body coiling around the barkie's hull. Set drove his spear in. He held it there, he pushed. Apep retreated. The dark water took it back. The bark steadied. Set lowered his spear. The river moved on, carrying Ra, carrying the seed of tomorrow's sunrise, through the long dark toward dawn. This would happen again tomorrow night, and the night after. Apep would never stop coming. The Egyptians understood this perfectly. They did not find it tragic, they found it true. And something new was building. In the eastern desert, beyond the first border that Set had held, a different kind of pressure, a second wave of foreign movement. The margin was restless. The chaos at Egypt's edge was gathering itself. The threat was real, and it was coming with something Egypt had never faced before. Not just horses, not just numbers. Something stranger, a god from beyond the border. A chaos that even Set had not yet met. That story is still ahead. The eastern margin stirred, not just the Hyksos this time. Something older was moving through the desert beyond Sinai. A presence the Red Land felt before any scout reported it. Set felt it in his sleep. There were gods beyond Egypt's borders. The Egyptians knew this. They traded with them, fought them, absorbed their peoples over centuries. Foreign gods existed. Set had always been their keeper, the one who stood between Egypt's gods and theirs. The god who was coming was called Baal, the storm god of the Canaanites. The Egyptians knew of him. Some texts equate him with Set directly. He was chaos, thunder, the ungovernable storm. He was, in other words, everything Set recognized in himself. Baal was not coming to attack. He was coming because he had heard about Set, about the god at the margin, the one the Egyptians called villain but kept at their borders anyway. He was curious. Chaos gods recognize each other. They met at the border. The exact location varies in different tellings. Some say Sinai, some say the coast. What every version agrees on, two storm gods facing each other at the edge of their respective worlds, neither diminished by the other. Baal spoke first. He said, in the language of storms, which both of them spoke, that he had heard Set was the god they called necessary, but not wanted. He said, I know that position. In Canaan, they argue about me too. Set said nothing for a long time. Then he said, what do you want? Baal said, I want to know how you do it. How you keep showing up. I struggle with that part. Set looked at the desert. He said, I don't know how not to. They sat at the border for 3 days. Not fighting, not negotiating, just at the edge of things, two gods of storm and chaos, comparing notes on what it costs to be what they were born as. That's the part that stays with you. On the third day, Baal asked about Osiris. Set was quiet for a long time before he answered. Then he said, I built the chest to fit him. I measured him while he slept. And I have spent every night since at the prow of his father, in Law's bark. Baal didn't answer immediately. He sat with it. Then he said, that sounds like a long way of staying close to someone you lost. Set looked at him. Then he looked at the desert. He didn't reply, he didn't need to. Maybe you know that feeling. Doing something that keeps you near to what you've lost. The long way around. The vigil that is also a kind of devotion. The Egyptians encoded it in myth. It's been waiting here 3,000 years. Baal left on the third morning. He walked back east into his own desert. At the border he turned once and looked at Set. Set raised a hand, not a wave, something more formal, more old. Baal did the same. Then they both turned back to their work. Set reported to no one. He didn't go to Horus. He didn't go to the Ennead. What had happened at the border was the kind of thing that happens at borders. Between the official story and the actual experience of living at the edge, he kept it. Thoth had watched, of course. He watched everything. He wrote it down. The meeting of the two storm gods at the border of their worlds. He wrote, Set spoke of his brother. He wrote, Set stays. Horus received word that the eastern border was quiet. He did not ask why. The reports from the scouts said movement in the Sinai, then stillness, then withdrawal. Horus rid it and moved on to the next petition. He trusted the margin to hold. He always trusted the margin to hold. Egypt flourished. The Nile flooded and receded. The wheat grew. Children were born and named and grew and died and were judged fairly by Osiris in the dot. The dead were honored. The living built temples. The gods attended to their domains. Set remained at the margin. Each night the bark. Each day the desert. The seasons were not the same to him as to the people of the Black Land. In the Red Land, seasons are subtler, marked by wind direction, by the color of dust in the air. Nephthys came once, not to reconcile, to be in the same place for a while. She sat with him in the desert for an afternoon. Neither of them spoke much. When she left, she touched his shoulder. He watched her go until she was out of sight. He stood there a while after she was gone. The desert was quiet. The way deserts are quiet, not empty, full of small sounds, but none of them voices. He turned and walked back toward the border. The work was still there. It was always still there. Night came again. It always came again. Set walked to the dock of the dot and waited for Ra's bark. The sun god descended. The bark entered the underworld. Set boarded. He took the prow. Here's something the myths never quite explained. Set wasn't always the villain. In the earliest Egyptian texts, the pyramid texts, from the Old Kingdom, 5,000 years old, he's a protector. He carries the dead pharaoh into the sky. He helps. That part came first. Something shifted during the New Kingdom, around 1300 BCE. The priests of Osiris grew more powerful. The myth of the murder became more central. Set's role as protector faded. His role as murderer grew. The same god, told differently. After Alexander conquered Egypt, after the Ptolemies ruled, after Rome came, Set became simply the evil one. The Greek and Roman world preferred its gods clean. Good and bad, Apollo and Typhon. Set mapped onto Typhon and stayed there. 3,000 years of complexity reduced. But in the tombs, the original Set remained. The Valley of the Kings was sealed. What was painted there stayed painted. The older truth preserved in the dark, in the place where the dead were kept. Complexity survives when it has nowhere to go. This is what the tombs tell us, the people who knew Set best. The ones who built the pyramids and wrote the first texts. They put him with the dead king. Not as a threat, as a guardian. They trusted him with the most important thing. Remember that. The story continues. The Eastern pressure built again, this time with something behind it that Set had not encountered before. Not the Hyksos, not Baal. Something that came from further east, older and stranger. Apep had sent something. Not itself, Apep could not leave the dot, but it had influence. The oldest chaos in the underworld could reach into the waking world through vulnerable places. The desert margin was one such place. Apep's influence in the waking world took the form of dissolution. The erosion of boundaries. The border between Egypt's desert and the foreign lands blurred. The border between night and day stretched. Unrest, not war, something more diffuse and harder to fight. Set felt it. He had spent eternity fighting Apep in the dot. He knew its signature. This was Apep's work, but here, in his territory, in the domain he had been assigned to protect. He went to the Ennead. This time he went to them, not summoned. He walked into the council hall and said, Apep is in the desert. The boundary is failing. I need authority to act. The Ennead deliberated. Even now, even with the border failing, they deliberated. Gods are slow with authority. Thoth wrote the deliberation down while it happened. He wrote they are afraid to trust him. He wrote they have no choice. Horus spoke. He said give him what he needs. The gods looked at the Falcon King, Osiris's son, Set's opponent for 80 years, and heard him say, give my uncle what he needs. The hall was quiet for a long time after that. The authority was granted. Set received it without ceremony. He turned and left the hall without a word. He was already thinking about the desert, about the border, about what needed to be done. Set went to the eastern border. He walked the affected area, the place where Apep's influence had reached through the membrane between the underworld and the waking world. He read the damage the way a builder reads a cracked wall. The dissolution went deep. Apep's influence had been building for years. Patient, the way oblivion is patient, eroding the boundary from the underworld side, while the living world went about its business unaware. He sent for Thoth. The god of wisdom came quickly. He had been expecting the summons. Set and Thoth stood at the border of the contaminated area and discussed what could be done. Between the warrior and the scribe, they built a plan. Thoth knew the words that could reseal a boundary. The oldest healing language, the kind Isis had used for Osiris, turned to a different purpose. Set knew the desert, every crack, every permeable place. Together they could map every point of intrusion. They worked for 7 days. The desert sun moved over them. The nights they worked by torchlight. Set didn't sleep. Thoth rested for hours only. This is what happens when the margin fails. Everything else is at risk. You don't rest until it holds. On the 7th day, the last entry point sealed. The boundary between the dot and the living world snapped back into place. A sound that nobody in Egypt heard, but that every god felt in their bones. The desert was clean. The story of Set, the god who killed his brother and guarded the sun, traveled further than Egypt. When Alexander's armies came, Greek scholars translated the myths. They saw something in Set that they recognized. Something they'd been trying to name in their own theology. The Gnostics, a tradition that grew in Egypt under Roman rule, found Set fascinating. They wrote about the chaos god who held secret knowledge, who stood at the edge of things and knew what others didn't. In some Gnostic texts, Set is wise, a keeper of truth, the version the priests in the tombs always knew. The alchemists of medieval Europe, who traced their tradition back to Egypt, to Thoth, to Hermetic wisdom, carried fragments of Set's story in their philosophy. The chaos that transforms, the prima materia, the raw unformed stuff that must exist before gold can be made. Set as the beginning of refinement. Even in modern psychology, in the tradition started by Jung, the figure of Set appears. The shadow, the part of the psyche that the ordered mind refuses, that operates at the margin, that is necessary and uncomfortable and productive when integrated. The shadow does the night work. Set's idea is older than Egypt. It will outlast whatever comes after. Every culture that has lasted has carried some version of it. The guardian who is also the exile, the necessary force that order cannot contain, but cannot survive without. That idea is Set. It has always been Set. The eastern border held. The Doet's membrane was sealed. The Hyksos had withdrawn. Baal had gone home. Apep waited in the dark water, as it always waited, for the next night's attack. Everything returned to its ordinary, extraordinary rhythm. Horus sent a message to Set. Not a summons, not a command, a message. It said the council reports the eastern border has been secured. The Duat membrane is sealed. Egypt is grateful. Set read it. He set it aside. He didn't reply. But Isis sent one too. Hers was shorter. It said, I saw you argue for him. I saw you go to the Ennead. Thank you. Set held this one longer. He didn't set it aside immediately. He held it for a while. He didn't reply to her either. But that night, at the bark, when he took his position at the pro, he stood a little differently. Not softer, not changed, just a little differently. Maybe you know what that feels like, being seen, and going back to your work anyway, but differently. It always came. Set raised his spear. He drove it in. He held it there. He pushed. The serpent retreated. The bark moved on. Dawn prepared at the eastern horizon. Then something changed. Not Apep, something else. The dark between the underworld river's banks began to close in. Not Apep's movement. Something larger. The river itself seemed to narrow. The walls of the dot pressed closer. The torchlight flickered. Not from wind. There was no wind in the dot. From something else, pressure. The pressure of absolute nothing pressing against the edges of the world. Apep had changed tactics. Ra spoke from the stern, urgent, the voice of the sun god afraid for the first time in a very long time. He said, Set. The bark is failing. Set turned. He assessed. He had never seen this form of the attack before. 3 seconds. Then I have it. Set did not use his spear. Instead, he opened his hands, palms out facing the pressing dark, and he let his own chaos out. The storm within him. The sandstorm, the roaring, the absolute disorder that was his birthright. He let it out completely. Set's chaos met Apep's oblivion. They were opposites, but not the way good and evil are opposite. More the way heat and cold are opposite, each defining the other, each pushing back against the other, the encounter producing energy. The bark held. Set's storm filled the space Apep had tried to compress. The river widened again. The darkness retreated. Not Apep running, Apep displaced. The storm god had made room for the sun by filling the nothing with something. Set pulled his chaos back in, the effort of it visible. Even a god feels the cost of releasing what they contain. He gathered himself. He stood, the prow again, the spear again, the dark river ahead. Ra said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't know you could do that." Set said, "Neither did I." Ra said, "Will it come back?" Set said, "Yes. It always comes back." Ra said, "And you will be here." Set said, "I'm always here." The bark emerged from the dot into the eastern sky. The sun rose over Egypt, enormous, warm, certain. Below, the country woke up. Nobody knew. The gods in the living world felt it as a distant shudder in the night that they couldn't explain. Thoth had watched. He always watched. He wrote Set used his own nature to save what his nature is supposed to threaten. He wrote, "This is the thing that was always true about him, and the reason the old priests put him in the tombs." Set descended from the barky at dawn, the desert, the red land, the warmth of a sun he had helped rise again. He walked into the dunes without looking back at the bark, or at Ra, or at Egypt shining beyond the margin. He stood in the desert and felt the day settle around him. The wind, the heat building from the east, the sand shifting under his feet. This was his. Not because anyone gave it to him, because it was his nature. The desert and the storm god were made for each other. Far to the north in Memphis, Horus was already in the throne room, receiving petitions, administering justice, Isis at his council, Thoth at his desk, Egypt functioning, the ordered world held in order by the king. And in the Duat, in the deep underworld, where the dead are gathered and judged, Osiris sat with his scales. The feather of Ma'at on one side, a human heart on the other. He weighed it carefully. He always weighed it carefully. 3 brothers, 3 domains. One murdered the other, lost the throne to the murdered one's son, and spends eternity guarding the dead king's path through the underworld. Egyptian mythology does not do simple. The night came again. It always came again. Egypt's oil lamps were lit, one by one, window by window, across the black land. The stars appeared over the red land and the green land both. The Nile caught starlight. Set walked to the dock of the Duat. The bark was coming. Ra completing the arc of the day, descending toward the west. Set could see it against the setting sun. He arrived at the dock before the bark did. He was always early. Ra saw him from the bark. The sun god, ancient and enormous, saw the storm god at the dock. Something in Ra's expression, hard to name. Not gratitude exactly. Not love. Something more honest than both. The recognition of necessity that has become something else over a very long time. The barky docked. Set boarded. He moved to the prow. The dark river stretched ahead. The stars of the Duat, different from the stars above, reflected in the black water. Set raised his spear slightly. Ready. Below the black water, Apep moved. The serpent stirred, as it always stirred, waking for its nightly attempt to end the sun. It coiled. It prepared. It rose toward the barky's hull. Set watched the water. He had watched it 10,000 times. He knew every pattern of Apep's approach. He knew the moment the attack would come before the attack came. He waited for it, calm, certain. Apep struck. Set drove his spear in. The collision. The ancient exchange. The serpent and the storm god meeting as they always met. The outcome already written in their natures. Set held. The bark steadied. Apep retreated. The dark water took it. The river moved on. Set lowered his spear. He exhaled, a long, slow exhalation that carries 3,000 years of nights in it. He turned his face toward the distant approach of dawn. The bark moved through the deep chambers of the dot, past the gods who kept the underworld's various hours, past Osiris's hall, Osiris, who did not look up as the bark passed, the dead king at his work, the chaos god at his. It has always been this way. Every night, Set passes the hall where Osiris judges. Every night Osiris does not look up. The two brothers, bound together by the most violent act in Egyptian mythology, sharing the underworld without sharing it. That's the part that stays with you. The barkie moved on. The hours of the night passed, each one presided over by a different guardian, a different aspect of the underworld's passage. Set watched the water. He held the prow. In Memphis, the night watch was changing. The guards at the city gates yawning through their shifts. The priests making the before-dawn offerings. The bakers starting their fires. The city preparing for the day that was coming. Confident it would come, as it always came. The trust was not naive. They built it into their religion. The morning prayers to Ra, the daily ceremony of the sun's return. They understood that something made the morning come. They thanked Ra, and somewhere below, Set held the spear. The eastern gate of the Doat appeared ahead, the place where the underworld meets the living world. The place where the dark river opens into sky. Set could see it, the gold of it, the warmth of it. Still far but present. One more attack. Apep always tried one more time, near the eastern gate. Its last chance to prevent the sun from rising. Set felt it before it came. The familiar weight in the water beneath the bark. He adjusted his grip on the spear. Apep came with everything it had. Near the eastern gate, where the dark river narrows before it opens into sky. The serpent threw its full force at the hull of the bark. Not the coiling attack. The full weight of oblivion against the vessel carrying the sun. Set went down to one knee. The impact, Apep's full weight against the bark, drove him down. His knee on the prow, his spear still level. He had never gone to one knee before. He noticed it. He got up. Ra called out from the stern. Not a command, not a prayer, just Set's name. The way you say someone's name when you need to know they're still there. Set said, I'm here. Ra said, I know. Set said, then let me work. Set drove the spear into Apep's skull, deeper than before, pushing through the resistance. The full force of the desert storm pressed into the shaft. He roared, the desert sound in the underworld. Thunder in a space that had never heard it. Osiris looked up. This moment, in the oldest texts, is the only time Osiris turns his attention to his brother during the night passage. He heard Set's roar. He looked. He saw the storm god holding the bark safe. He saw his brother. Apep screamed. The serpent's full assault broken by the spear and the roar and the full chaos of the desert god. It retreated, not gradually, completely, pulling back into the deepest dark of the underworld. The water calmed. Set straightened. He turned to face the eastern gate. Still ahead, still glowing, warm and enormous. He was damaged. The blow had marked him. He moved toward it anyway. The bark moved toward it anyway. Osiris watched until the bark was out of sight. Then he looked at the soul waiting before his scales. He said, in the oldest Egyptian text that records these words, he said, continue. And he returned to his judgments. The bark reached the eastern gate. The darkness of the underworld gave way, first to gray, then to the warm gold of approaching day. Set felt it, the heat of the coming sun, the warmth of the world above. Ra emerged. The sun rose. The whole of Egypt received the morning, the Nile catching it first, then the fields, then the white walls of Memphis, then the desert, the red land, Set's land. Warm with the sun he carried through the dark. Set descended from the bark, the desert, his desert. He walked into the dunes and stood still for a long time, the sun on his face, the red land warm around him, the night's work done, another morning made. In the dot, Osiris sat with his scales. He weighed souls with care. And perhaps, in the small part of him that was still the brother before the murder, he thought about what he had seen. The storm god at the prow. The roar that shook the underworld, Set staying. He sent no message. Some things between brothers cannot be said. But he weighed that day's hearts with particular care. He made sure nothing innocent was lost. You can honor someone without speaking to them. Sometimes that's all you can do. Egypt continued. The Nile continued. The sun rose and set and rose again. The pharaohs came and went, each one living as Horus. Each one dying to become Osiris. Each one ruling in the shadow of Set's protection at the margin. And in the desert, and on the bark, and at the borders of the world, Set kept his vigil. Not because he was rewarded. Not because anyone asked. Because the desert was his, and the bark was his post, and the edge of things had always been where he belonged. This is still happening, right now. Below whatever world you sleep in tonight, the bark moves. Set stands at the prow. Apep waits, and the sun is preparing, slowly, certainly, inevitably, to rise. Let that settle. Set at the prow. The work continuing, the dawn coming, the system working because the one at the margin holds. It has always been this way. It will be this way tomorrow. The desert will be warm when the sun reaches it. The red land sets land. The ochre dunes holding the day's heat. The wind moving across the stone in the patterns only Set reads. His domain. His always. The story has been going a long time, so have you. Let the myth carry the weight now. Set has the prow. Osiris has the scales. Horus has the throne. The system holds, you can rest. The Nile is moving, south to north. The way it always moves. The way it moved before the first pharaoh and will move after the last. The river carries what it carries. The desert holds its edge. The sun will rise. Set stands at the prow. He always stands at the prow. The storm god. The one they called villain, exile, murderer, necessary. At his post in the dark, holding the line between everything and nothing. The sun will rise. It always rises. Because of this, the sun rose. It always rises. And tonight, wherever you are, the bark is moving through the dark. Set is at the prow. The work is happening. Let that be enough for now. Set's story is about what it costs to be necessary and misunderstood at the same time. Not one or the other. Both. The Egyptians built a 3,000-year civilization on the honest acknowledgement of that. They didn't pretend Set was good. They didn't pretend he was simple. They said this god is difficult. This god has done terrible things. This god is also the one who keeps the sun rising. All of that is true. They held all of it. Maybe you know someone like Set. The difficult one. The one who doesn't fit the room. Who is also the one you call when the thing nobody else can handle arrives. You know what it costs them. You've seen it. Or maybe you are that. The one who holds the edge. Who does the night work. Who keeps showing up for something that doesn't offer recognition in return. Set has been doing that since before the pyramids. You've been doing it since longer ago than today feels. The myth doesn't promise Set a reward. It doesn't say the recognition arrives eventually. It says the sun rises. And Set watches it come, every morning. From the prow of the bark, or from the red land. The sun rises, he sees it. There is something the Egyptians understood that we sometimes forget, that chaos is not the opposite of order. It is the condition that makes order possible. The Nile floods, destroys the old growth, and that destruction is next year's harvest. Set and Osiris need each other. This was not a metaphor to the ancient Egyptians. It was observable truth. The desert storm brought rain. The flood brought fertility. The death of Osiris brought the judgment of the dead, which is justice. Cheo serves, it always has. Set never became simple. 3,000 years of Egyptian theology, through every dynasty, every conquest, every revision, and the original complexities survived in the tombs. The god who murdered and protected. The villain who keeps the sun rising, both, always. The story of Set says the world needs its difficult things. The margin must be held. The edge of order requires a guardian who is not entirely ordered. You cannot put a gentle god at the prow of the bark when Apep comes. And Set does it, night after night. Without the throne, without the credit, with only the desert and the bark and the work. The Egyptians put this in the pharaoh's tomb. They wanted their kings to know it. They wanted someone to know it. What does it mean for you tonight? That's the question the myth leaves open. The Egyptians didn't close it. They told the story and let the listener find their own answer in it. That's what myths are for. Maybe it means the part of you that doesn't fit isn't broken. Maybe it means the difficult work you do in the dark matters, even when nobody says so. Maybe it means the sun rises tomorrow. That's not nothing. The Egyptians would say Ma'at is restored. The balance holds. Order and chaos in their proper relationship. Not order victorious, not chaos unbound, but the two in tension, producing the world that is livable. Set at the margin. Osiris in the depths. Horus on the throne. This is not a comfortable story. Set is not a comfortable god. The Egyptians were not a comfortable people. They built monuments to the dead. They spent enormous effort on the afterlife. They looked at death and chaos directly and built their theology from what they saw. And from that direct looking, they produced this story that the god of chaos is not the enemy. He is the guardian, the one who stands between the living world and oblivion, every night, alone. Let that settle quietly now. The story has done its work. You don't need to hold all of it. The myth will hold it for you, the way it has held it for 3,000 years. That's what it was made for. The red land is quiet tonight. The desert cools. The stone holds the day's warmth, but the air turns clear and enormous. Somewhere in that enormous air, Set is present. The way the desert is always present to those who know how to read it. The Nile is moving. The bark is in the dot. Set is at the prow. Osiris weighs a heart with care. Horus holds the throne. The system works. You can let go now. Rest. The desert is holding its edge. The bark is on the dark water. The sun is preparing, as it always prepares, to rise. You've been carrying enough today. Let the storm god carry the rest. All civilizations end. The last hieroglyph was carved around 394 CE, in a temple at Phila near the Nile's first cataract. After that, the language went silent, but the tombs remained. Set remained in the tombs. The tombs sealed. The desert covered some. The Nile shifted and buried others. For 1,000 years, the Valley of the Kings was silent. Set waited in the dark, as he always waited in the dark, for whoever came next. Scholars came first Arabs, then Europeans, breaking open what the desert had kept. The Rosetta Stone in 1799, Champollion's translation in 1822. The hieroglyphs spoke again, and there in the old texts was Set, exactly as the priests had always known him. The Egyptologists found something surprising. The Set in the oldest texts, the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, was not the simple villain. He was guardian protector, the one who carried the dead pharaoh into the sky, the original Set, the one the tombs preserved. The story had survived its own demonization. The Ptolemies had simplified him. The Romans had equated him with Typhon. Christianity had made him Satan's prototype, and the oldest text still said he stands at the prow. He holds the spear. The sun rises. That survival matters. Ideas that are true tend to survive. Not always intact, not always recognized, but present. The chaos god who guards the sun has been in every culture, under different names. He doesn't go away. The edge needs someone. In modern Egypt, the desert is still the desert. The red land, the Deshret, still red, still hot, still holding its margin against the cultivated Nile Valley. The boundary Set kept is still there. Held by geography now, held by the desert itself. And in the Valley of the Kings, in the painted tombs, Set is still at the prow of Ra's bark. Still holding the spear. Still facing the dark water. The image hasn't moved in 3,000 years. It won't. This is what legacy looks like, sometimes. Not the throne. Not the monument. Not even the name on everyone's lips. The image in the dark. The truth in the place where the dead are kept. Still there. Still saying what it was painted to say. The bark is still moving. Set is still at the prow. The dark water is still ahead, and the sun is still preparing to rise, as it has prepared every night since before the first pharaoh drew breath. Some things do not stop. The story is done for tonight. The myth rests now, the way the desert rests at night, full and quiet and vast. You can rest too. The Nile is moving south to north. It always moves. The sound of it, if you were there, slow and broad and patient. Ancient water on its ancient course. The desert is holding its edge. The margin where the black land meets the red. That clear line. Quiet and certain in the dark. Ra's bark is in the dot. The dark river. Set is at the prow. The work is being done so that morning can come. It is being done right now. Osiris weighs a heart somewhere below. The scales in balance. The hall of two truths quiet and golden. The dead king at his work. Horus holds the throne in Memphis. The falcon king. The court sleeping around him. Egypt quiet under the night sky. The stars over Egypt are the same stars they always were. Orion, the Pleiades. The Milky Way arching over the Nile Valley. 3,000 years of the same sky. If tonight felt like something, subscribe. We'll be here next week. Another myth, another night like this. Now let the story settle. The red land is quiet. The bark moves on. The dawn is coming, slowly, certainly from the east. Sleep now. We'll be here. When you're ready.